None of his shadows or the new breed who wear his title like a badge of honor. Dredgen means abyss. It is an ancient tongue, not human, not Hive. Just forgotten arcana, another layer of uncertainty and fear draped around a bastard to provide comfort against his sins. It means nothing. It is a void, as is his path. This is where my thread for all of this got started. From the words of Shin Malfur, all I could do was sit and contemplate the idea. Not human, not Hive, just forgotten arcana. It led to the last 2 episodes on the 9 that we've had. It's led to a mile-long idea of wondering where the name Dredgen comes from, and where Shin found this information. What is it that could lead to all of this? And why the link back to the Dredgens as a whole? If you're interested to hear my thoughts and how far it goes, then stick around. Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and last time I left you with a teaser about Crota being in ownership of the Cocytus space station. At this point, I have beaten the ideas of what this station is into the dirt, and I'm not going to cover that again. I'm not going to cover my past thoughts nearly at all if I can help it, in fact, because they are there for you to consume if you're interested. If not, then I assume you're up on your lore, and we're here to discuss the weapons of sorrow, Crota, and the 9. Let's at least address and establish what a weapon of sorrow is. Thorn and Necrocosm would be regarded as such weapons, mixed with our technology and Hive technology, or at least bones from the Hive or something else. They require a great amount of effort to form and seem to have varying levels of potency. If we focus on Thorn in particular, we see a weapon that is able to drain a Guardian of its light. This can be in a gradual way that turns into not being as harmful for a Guardian, or it could be entirely deadly, as is the case with the weapon wielded by Dredgen Yor, the original owner of Thorn. We see his weapon able to destroy and annihilate a Guardian's light, but yet we see the Shadows of Yor wielding Thorn as well, and not killing any Guardians that we know of. In fact, that's the entire point of the Shadows to begin with, but that's a story entirely for another day. Is there a tally for how many times I end up saying that in these episodes? No? Good. That's probably a good idea not to have that. As far as confirmed weapons of sorrow, we have 2, with an arguable 3rd and 4th. They are Thorn, Necrocosm, and arguably Touch of Malice and Bad Juju. There's also some tomfoolery, possibly with the last word, and it showing up how it did within the Draw mission, but I feel that's a completely different topic to cover with my thoughts. A story for another day. Now there's your second tally if you want it. You know, Oryx, Crota's dad, has a whole ton of weapons that we can get from the King's Fall raid and Taken King. None of them have seemingly been marked as weapons of sorrow. All of this is to lead us to how very focal they are, and how they are formed by means we don't generally understand or know. We know it requires a human-based weapon as a base for the ritual. We also know that Hive magics are involved, but understanding and manipulation of them is also rather unknown, at best. As a point to note, we're unsure if weapons of sorrow are tuned to certain species, and like some bacteria and virus, may only affect the main species being targeted and not another species altogether. Lastly, the weapons of sorrow that are absolutely confirmed are Thorn and Necrocosm. That's important to note. Both of these weapons have been influenced by one Hive or sect of Hive in particular, Crota. What I'm saying here, essentially, is that I'm playing with a lot of unknowns, and you should very much know that before we dig into things too far. But that said, I think I'm done my primer, so here we go. Cocytus is listed as a Golden Age experiment within the 2 entries that heavily deal with the facility, Cocytus from Stolen Intelligence and the Gate from Dust. Either Lavinia gets this information from the same record, since it's the one she references in the Gate, or it's known previously to the Cryptarchs or others in our system. This is unknown. Cocytus is also stumbled on by the Dead Orbit members of the craft called the Sophia, but previously it was marked as A113. Nothing was known to us about the station at the time of this record being taken by the Sophia, and it's unknown if they had found anything else relevant to tell this ghost or not before sending it on its way. What we do know is an awoken scout craft had heralded the Sophia and kept them around A113. Whether this is on purpose or for some kind of test or was unintended to keep them away from the station, again, motives are unknown. Probably a good time to note that the information on A113 has matured with time, with the name change at least being supplied to us. This could be in regards to the Awoken's usual naming scheme for things being Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, with some West Asia intermixed as well. This may not be the official Golden Age name for this station. With this somewhat known, we can gather it was a secret facility of some kind, with unknown origins, minus its supposed time of construction. We're unsure who put the station together, or really where it even came from in the first place. I mean, there's still a very real possibility that it's from outside of our solar system entirely, given to us by an alien entity, but likes to think that, of course, thanks to the Awoken's logs. Clovis Bray, Ishtar Academy, military... Yeah, your guess is as good as mine right now. Alright, I'll stop harping on this point now, but I just needed to drive that point home. This station seems unrelated to the Hive and Crota, but his being on it at one point really does make some interesting theories, especially knowing who was on the other side of one of those portals. Part of this goes with Crota's and, somewhat, Oryx's reason for existing, a purpose that has been embedded within their psyche since birth, but is upheld by the symbiotic worm that infests the Hive host. Oryx was meant to explore all things, even the unexplorable. Crota was meant to conquer all he could in his father's name, seen and evident by setting up the shrine of Oryx that was found on Luna. Supposedly there are multiple of them, so says Osiris. This is where the unknowns of Cocytus open up the possibilities of what the station was used by Crota for. There is one exact that seems to be there, however, and that's the gate that leads to the Nine, though that assumes that stayed stable while Crota was there. But the portals being used to go to different areas within the universe or galaxy, just some unknowns in terms of what the other portals within the facility may be pertaining to. Though, if Crota were still in our system and able to use Cocytus as a staging area, it would explain why he hung around after the collapse had ended. What can be used for good can also be cultivated for evil. Let's assume that the gate or portal that led to the Nine was still accessible to Crota while Cocytus was in his control. Let's also assume that Crota was successful in accessing some form of knowledge from this gate. I have reasons that will back up these assumptions here in a bit, but just let me set this up. If we look into the fall of the Guardian named Orin, we see that the Nine start to whisper to her. We see that she is being coerced by the Nine, slowly starting to turn into the being known as the Emissary. It seems she hangs on by willpower to avoid going to a certain area in space that seems to be pulling and calling to her. We find out this information within the entries of synesthesia and scales within the Ecdysis book. But how she contracts this disease, or whatever you want to call it, is found in the entry called Debt. She runs into Xur, and Xur produces a box for Orin, one that should be familiar to her, but is not. Inside are particles of dust, more specifically, the ash of her dead mother from her life centuries ago. This is one of the items she brings with her in the entry entitled Seeds and Cuttings. The small silver jar is revealed with time to be what held her mother's ashes as the entries go by, and that the Nine now speak somehow through these ashes is part of what I want to focus on. The Hive deal in the remains of many species. If we reference the weapons that Oryx has aboard the Dreadnought, we see that they are created by chitin, broke down by keeping prisoners or just remains of the defeated on board the ship. We see further confirmation of this in the Sunless Cell strike from the Dreadnought as well, where Eris Morn and our ghost have a small conversation.
Eris, why does Oryx have a prison?
Prison is the wrong term. He holds his victims, tortures them, then renders them down into chitin for his ships.
Chitin. Lovely.
We also see in Crota's holds and again on the Dreadnought that the Thrall used the remains of humans, or fallen possibly, for sending small tribute to the larger Hive. I mean, bones are all over the place, and they're not just Hive. You can fairly clearly see human remains among the refuse. This pans back to something the Hive generally dabble in, and their science and magic as a whole. Crota had a wizard, or more particularly, a death singer that was around him on Luna. Iryut was able to understand the particulars of words, especially those of death. Tolan goes on a fantastic little rant that I'll keep up for you all to read over. Hopefully you'll hear it in his voice again if you care to read it over. I don't want to focus on this as much as I think the title that Iryut holds is more important. Death Singer. The Death Singers seem to hold a special place among the Hive, and so I turned to two others. Or a single other split in half, that's your call to make on that one. The twins of Ir-Halak and Ir-Hanuk caused me to understand something within the Books of Sorrow that give way for a more factual case point of their retellings. I didn't think I'd refer to this again anytime soon, but here we are. Within the Books of Sorrow, number 38, The Partition of Death, the Death Singers of Ir-Halak and Ir-Hanuk give us a small understanding into the Hive magics. I'll just stress small. One day, Oryx decided to grow new wings. While he wrestled with his worm, he came upon his twin daughters dying in a wound between places. "What are you doing, my daughters?" he asked. He was afraid that Ir-Halak and Ir-Hanuk were trying to go into the deep, where only the Tablets of Ruin allowed Oryx to go. "We are dying, father," they said, "as many times as we can manage." "That's adorably precocious," Oryx shook out his new wings. "But why?" "We propose a method by which ascendant souls can be detached and integrated into a tautological and autonomous thanatosphere, which we tentatively term an oversoul. Oversouls can be stored in a throne world as a mechanism of enhanced death resilience. As a side effect, new refinements of our death song may be achieved, moving us closer to a generally effective paracausal death impulse." Oryx brandished his sword. "Speak the royal tongue, or I'll pin you up for air to eat. If we can separate our deaths from ourselves and hide them, we will be hard to kill." Oryx is none too thrilled over the use of common speak that the twins give us. It shows that the unknowns of the Hive are seemingly masked in a language we have issue understanding, which isn't far off from what Tolan mentions of Iryut in her songs. Regardless, this shows that the Hive are very interested in the science of death and have other fascinations besides. I've always felt from this entry and others that they do practice a type of science. They seek to understand just as we do. After all, it is Oryx's purpose. His worm would be very displeased if he didn't explore and understand all he came across. And so we see that they also use the dead for purposes. Plenty of purposes. The Nine also seem to use remains to some point or effect. I'll try not to be too graphic here, but within cremation, ashes are what's left of a body and placed within a container of some kind, in case you're unaware. This means these are the remains of bone and everything else. Obviously, there's a bit of a link here, and as they use the remains of Orin's mother to seemingly trigger whatever happens within the Risen, it gets my gears moving a bit, especially with an old story of ours from a long time past. But before that, I do want to read one part from Synesthesia. 35. Orin begins to experience walking hallucinations. Immaterial strangers speak to her in unrecognizable languages. While she reaches for Namki, she feels as if she is falling into him, being pulled through him, sieved into smaller and smaller scarves of some atom self that he breathes into the blood of his bones. When she continues her hunt for the queen, she feels a crushing fist around her windpipe. There is something she must say, but she has no words to say it. There is somewhere she must go. Someone she must be. It is not horrifying, though she thinks it should be. Instead, it is unspeakably lonely. I just wonder if Orin wasn't the first to have this happen, or to have some kind of suggestion pressed into them. Even then, I doubt that the next person I'm going to highlight is the only one that this might have happened to. Yet he grew weary. Stories haunted his nights. Old stories, those no longer told. Those locked behind tight lips for fear of what they may invoke. Whenever the sun dropped below the horizon and the moon rose high, his thoughts wandered. How safe was safe? How long could they fight with the darkness still writhing? So every day he would fight and build and protect. And every day a city grew beneath the giant. And every night he would think about all that was never said and stare intently at the moon above. Slowly, the shadow's whisper became a voice, a dark call, offering glories enough to make even the brightest light wander. He knew he was fading, yet he still yearned. On his last day, he sat and watched the sun fall. His final thoughts, pure of mind, if not body, held to a fleeting hope. Though they would suffer for the man he would become, the people would remember him as he had been. Longtime readers and listeners will know the he I'm referring to. I just wanted to play it out a little bit if I'm honest. Rezyl Azzir. Don't know him by that name? That's alright, you will soon. Dreams are and have been a powerful force within destiny. We see this more with beings like Riven and how she controlled Uldren as well, where something seems to have infested him. Rezyl was a Risen that had a lot of combat experience, but where we could easily focus on Uldren, well, that might give way to another theory altogether about the Taken of the Nine, but anyway, story for another day. Crap, that's number 3. Rezyl interests me more for a few general reasons. The first, which can be passed away and still have this work or make sense, is the idea that the stories he hears from those about the moon and the horrors that reside there. The other is in the angry purpose of jagged thorns. Thorn is the weapon, as I mentioned before, that links Rezyl Azzir, aka Dredgen, to the Hive in some way or fashion. The possible science behind the weapon is the important thing here, more than the man that may wield it. Still, you can't talk about Thorn without bringing up Yor. Well, you can, but it's really difficult to separate the two. That was kind of most of the point of the story, after all. I think it worth revisiting what caused Rezyl to turn as well, and just to reiterate and kind of remind you exactly what it was that went on. So, from the Legends cards, Rezyl Azzir, and the Triumphant Fall. Rezyl flinched as the wicked woman began to speak in a tongue that resembled torture more than language. The pain was searing, complete. The demon approached the writhing hero. As she spoke, her violent words began to take shape, morphing from syllables of death to a known offering of haunted human languages. The demon woman leaned in close and whispered intimately. Rezyl's ears bled as she spoke. 2 days had passed since Rezyl stepped from the dark corridors beneath the moon, back into the light. His ghost pressed him for details time and again. He wanted to know all he could of the wicked woman and her promise of suffering. Of the sea of mindless, chittering death. Of the hulking night and Rezyl's epic battle. The ghost was enthralled and deeply concerned. If the monsters below the moon were active and aware, the city must be warned. Rezyl agreed. As they watched another Earth rise from the lonely quiet of the lunar surface and planned their long journey home, Rezyl pulled fragmented bone from the pouch that hung on his left hip, a reminder of the evil that lurked beyond the light, and the last remnants of the wicked woman's betrothed. And while he recounted once more the events of his time in the shadows, he took his rose from its holster and began grafting the bone to its steel frame. Just another trophy from another battle won. It was only later, and far too late, that the first whispers came and the bones revealed their true, jagged purpose. This is why I will concede that Rezyl hadn't heard the whispers of the dark until after he went to the moon, started to hear the whispers of this awful woman and the torture that it caused him, along with, of course, grafting bone to the weapon that he utilized called Rose. That Tails could have simply pushed him to the moon is entirely possible, but that he hears whispers, as we see with Orin and several others, just tends to make me think. This is evident by some of the testimony by Teb and Gray and how their names are not picked, but rather told to them on their paths of becoming Dredgens. We find this in the Book of the Unmaking, within Whispers, Purpose, and Secrets, just to name a few of the entries. Whispers are a prevalent part of what seems to link many things together, granted. The Hive have the worm gods. The Ahamkara are capable of doing the same. You may remember I tend to think of them as the same but different species, suffering from evolutionary differences. We see in the entry called The Bone, from the Book of Dust, that the Ahamkara may have been used by the Nine in order to grant wishes for them, or otherwise. This was one of possibly their first lines to try to reach out to our reality again. Using Ahamkara, you say? I would have never guessed. The Nine relying on and using whispers and suggestion. Well, that was something thought of and somewhat spoken, but it was never fully confirmed. Until now, of course. I should also mention that coercion and infiltration are not above the Hive. Crota was told to diversify his traits and learn from his siblings, which were the twins, Irhalak and Iranuk. Both of them focused on cunning, which is similar to their aunt, Savathun. Family is still pretty big for the Hive, after all. Then again, love is war. I think there's a few songs for that, actually. Anyway, that's all the puzzle pieces that I see. For now, I'll produce this and someone will say something in the comments and go, "Oh great, yeah, that's another line that I could have talked about. Thanks, memory." But how do these pieces fit together? Time is really a factor here, since we're unsure how long Crota's been down and out on Luna. There must have been a reason that he was looking over the Traveler, while knowing that Guardians have been on the ground, especially after the Battle of Mare Imbrium. Why does everything come back to that? After the Great Disaster, Crota seemed to be in a really good position to counterattack and rend out the city. I mean, for obvious reasons of we kinda need a game to play, and possibly others that we are unaware of, Crota didn't attack us. With this information of him having control of Cocytus, it makes me wonder if we can infer this is the reason he isn't interested in us. Basically, we might have been worth some kind of tithing or power to the Hive, but it seemed insignificant to the Hive demigod. Keep in mind as well, I'm not saying that the Great Disaster happened before Crota went to Cocytus, but just another piece of setup here that I think is necessary to talk about. With controlling Cocytus, Crota was able to look into these manifolds and portals, which then caused Crota's group of Hive to stumble on the portal that could have led to the Nine. Upon looking into and setting a group of researchers to the task, the Hive group perhaps found means or observed how the Nine's signal of whispers and language perhaps worked with their own. Either infected by or simply acted upon by these whispers, the Hive started to work with and understand them. A series of events and research go through Crota's cunning curators, and they find a means to merge these whispers and voices with their own technology. The Hive eventually find a way to combine weapons or equipment with this technology, which we end up seeing the Necrocosm come to fruition. This could be before or after Rezyl Azzir arrives on Luna, as we know Rezyl had an auto rifle called Inferno before switching to his Rose. Inferno was lost to the Hive, while Rose was taken back with him after the battle in the Hive Fortress. It very well could be that Rezyl Azzir was just an unwilling participant to the experiments of these Hive. There is one other option to this. The Nine's influence in the Hive might have been unknown to them entirely. Between the symbiotes that they have, or the general relation to bones and dead tissue or ash and dust, again, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns here. At some point along the line, however, Rezyl does come into the picture. He takes bones and such with him, and soon after experiences whispers and suggestion. He goes along the hated path, which leads him to fully denounce the light, and be remade as Dredgen Yor. From this point, the new Shadows of Yor step in after the story and tales of the legend that was Dredgen Yor start to pass down the line, investigating what made the man into the dark figure he was. In doing so, they happen upon the old ship that he used to use, and suffer the same symptoms that Rezyl had on Luna after his encounter with the Hive Wizard. Soon after, they follow the path of Yor and discover what he had done. But this is going down another road entirely. For those wondering why I giggled, yes, this is for a story for another day. That the whispers follow this group and others. That the Thorn itself whispers to us or implants suggestion for the next steps of what it takes to reconstruct it. It makes me wonder how much influence the weapon may have on us over time. The Nine are after the use of Guardians for one means or another, or at least our light. They seek a means into our reality. Is it to return to our reality or attempt to live within it? To discover another region that exists within their reach? These are questions yet unanswered. That the weapons of sorrow could be a conduit for a piece of the Nine, or other members of, or something similar to them as a whole, I don't know. I'm having a hard time possibly explaining myself or lining things up entirely. For right now, this is where I'll leave things. Either the ties that exist are open and available to us to see filled in with time, or nothing will come of this at all. I'm okay with either event. I just find the connecting pieces, loose as they may be, to be pretty interesting nonetheless. Now, this is already carrying on way longer than I expected, so in the interest of respecting your time, I'm going to cut things here. If you enjoyed this content, then I have to ask you to hit those buttons, all of those on the platform ask of you, since it sounds like many aren't even getting notified of my content being uploaded, and those are for the people that have been subscribed for a rather long time. Have to battle that algorithm somehow, and I thank you guys if you can give me a hand with that. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and thank you for getting this far. No matter where or when you are, I'll see you next space time. Take care.